Yeah, so we'll get underway. It's a minute past 10 and time to start. I'd like to welcome you all to this final session of our series of four webinars on community renewable energy. Today we have Gerald Arends as our keynote speaker from Komo Energy, and shortly I will introduce Gerald to you. But it's great to see you all here today, and I hope you're all keeping dry in this very wet weather that we have. I don't know about your area, but Healesville's flooded. All the rivers are up, and the ground is like walking on a sponge filled with water. It's just incredible. I've never seen so much water in the area. So great that we've still got the technology available to be able to run the session. I'm looking forward to working with Gerald with you today on the presentation. Before I go any further, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country and to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. And I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. And of course, as I have done in other sessions, I'd also like to very much thank the Victorian Government and Sustainability Victoria for the funding that they made available to Healesville Core for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub so that we could actually run these sessions. In addition, it's been great to have the support of Pakenham Living Learning and Emerald Community House. They've been very enthusiastic supporters of the work that we offered, and they came on right from the start. And right from the beginning, I began working with Mary from Emerald, and she was really keen, and she was followed up very quickly by Miriam from Pakenham. And they've been great people to work with. We couldn't, of course, have run this through living and learning centres and community houses if it hadn't been for them volunteering to come on board. And a big thank you too to the Education Department for providing the funding that Miriam and Mary applied for. So we're very fortunate to have that so that we can pay for the program, pay for our teachers and for our IT work. And a big thank you to Tom, who's in the background. He's been helping out, making sure we've got a good, all our IT is in order, and we have good presentations. I think you should have received from Pakenham and from Emerald an email with a list of the links for the videos. Did any of you receive that during the week? I see some Helen's nodding her head. Just nod your head if you yes, thumbs up. That's good. That's great. So those videos are available now, and you can go and have a look at the ones that you've missed. And do feel free to provide the links to people that you know who might be interested in your networks. If you've got Facebook pages, just put them up there so people can have a look at them. We would like to make this material more widely available. Not everybody could be present, of course, for these sessions at specific times on specific days, but when they're available online like that, people can choose them for themselves when they watch them, which is really great. The other thing that was sent out to you was some information that Gerald provided for pre-reading. Did you all get that? Put your thumbs up if you did. Yep. Okay, terrific. The other thing was the registration, very important, the registration for the site visit. Did you all receive that? Thumbs up? Yep, terrific. So obviously for insurance purposes and for health and safety, we need to have people registered for this event. So we've got some control over the numbers. We are dealing with unusual circumstances with the amount of water that we have and slippery ground, and the visit up to Mount Toolabawong will of course be over rough ground. It's on sort of what used to be farmland, and you'll be walking in paddocks and on rough roads and that sort of thing. So you do need to have good footwear, sensible clothing for outdoor wear, good water, rain protection, have a hat, an umbrella, these sorts of things. And when you register, I'll provide further information for you and tell you how to get to there as well. There has been a little bit of a hiccup with the visit to the Wandon water treatment plant, that solar operated one. The difficulty is that there's been so much water that it's dangerous to take people on site at the moment. So I was just advised yesterday that they're no longer taking visitors onto that site, but we're waiting to see what will happen over the next couple of weeks to see whether the water will drain away sufficiently to enable our group to be able to go on board. So more about that closer to the time. We have a couple of chat messages here. Yes, from Fee, that she received the email and passed on to one interested party, and she can't see an email for pre-reading for this session. However, Helen Ross says it only came through about 6 a.m. this morning. You obviously haven't had much time for that. I did hear from Pakenham that they had sent it out during the week, but it seems as though that is not the case, unfortunately. Oops, hang on. Yeah, so let's move on to the session now with Gerald. The focus of the session today is on how community renewable energy groups can work with industry partners. And I first got onto this idea when I set up Healesville Core back in 2017, and I suddenly realized, of course, that coming from a humanities background and having all volunteers on our committee, none of whom had any experience in electrical engineering or solar farms or any sort of technical background, that we really were not in a position to be able to do the sort of technical work that we were aspiring to do. So what we focused on was doing what we knew we could do, which was provide educational programs for the community. We got experts in who did have the technical knowledge, and they addressed the community. And over time, we gradually made connections with a wide range of different technical people from the industry who could help us out. And then a couple of years ago, Jonathan and Gerald from Komo made a video talking about the work that they do for community groups. And I was quite taken by them. They sounded like they were very genuine professionals and genuine human beings at the same time, which is terrific to have that two matching up. And they were interested in not only running a business and earning money from that business, but also supporting community energy groups. I was a bit skeptical about that to begin with. I thought, well, you know, they're probably there just for the money. But over time, I gradually began to discover that their integrity is there, and they have been very committed to working with different community energy groups, and they have provided Healesville Core with quite a bit of support. The first work that we did with Komo Energy was to apply for a Commonwealth Government grant for a couple of $1 million for setting up a microgrid in Healesville. It was a huge amount of work. We could not have done it on our own. Gerald and Jonathan put a huge amount of effort and work into that, a lot of technical expertise. They got other experts in the field involved in that as well, which we would never, ever have had any possibility of even knowing about, let alone knowing how to contact them. And unfortunately, we were unsuccessful with that particular grant, but it was a great beginning for us. And then they also assisted us with the grant for the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub. And I'm positive that we would not have got that grant without the expertise that they provided across a whole range of different areas to do with that grant application. So we were very fortunate to get it. And part of the agreement was that they would work with us pro bono to provide the grant application. And we built into that grant the the fact that Komo Energy would actually be our industry partner, and there was a budget in the grant to pay them for the work that they were going to do. So Sustainability Victoria was well aware that it was a joint enterprise and that Komo Energy was involved in that. And it was a wonderful experience, I must say, working with Gerald and Jonathan and the 6 community energy groups in our area. And we could not have done the work that we did do without them. And as a consequence, we now have a number of projects that have been triaged. Gerald and Jonathan have done quite a bit of work on them to look at the feasibility of the projects, worked out business cases in some instances, and they're now proceeding with some of that work using the particular business community model that they have, which Gerald will talk with you about later on in the session. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Gerald, who can tell you more about his work with Komo Energy, and he will tell you all about the way in which they work with community energy groups. And I understand he's going to involve you in a very interesting exercise as well. Over to you, Gerald.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for that introduction and speaking to the fact that we're human. That was good to hear. It's good to be here, and thank you to all of you for making time to participate in this session today. The way I like to run these sessions is very, very interactive. So I would very strongly encourage you to come onto video and switch off your mics, and please get involved. Yes, we are a business. We are a business that is in that spectrum from community to hardcore business, somewhere in that gray zone in between. We are a business, but this is not a marketing session. We do talk about community and industry collaboration. And just because I know it somewhat intimately, we will be talking also about the model that we use in that field. But that's just one example. And I do welcome challenge, and I do welcome discontent and adverse comments that I might have to disarm or not, as you wish. So I'm very, very open to you disagreeing with me, and I hope that you can all participate quite heavily. Maybe first a couple of words about Komo Energy. We set up Komo Energy about 6 years ago, Jonathan and I. And we came to Komo Energy from different angles. Jonathan is known as a market leader in Australia for corporate power purchase agreements, for corporates buying renewable energy from wind farms and solar farms. He's working for UGS as Energy Innovation Officer, and he's also the founding technical director of the Business Renewable Centre Australia, which educates the business community about green power purchase agreements. And he felt at the time that there was a lot of corporate demand for renewable energy, but not from large-scale solar farms, but from smaller solar farms, because a lot of corporate loads are not 50 or 100 megawatts, but are maybe only half a megawatt or 1 megawatt. And he found there were just no assets, no solar farms and no small wind farms that these corporates could actually talk to. And I came from a very different angle. I'm German by background, and after a long time in England, I spent 2.5 years in a German solar contractor and developer. And this is about 15 years ago. We did a lot of small solar farms that would be considered community scale here in Australia. So sitting between the very successful rooftop market, both residential and commercial, and the very large scale market. And this in between space of 1 to 5 megawatts is really not a market that is established here in Australia, but to our mind, it's actually the scale that overlaps with the ambition of the community renewable energy sector quite often. So I've been working as an energy lawyer, as a business developer, as a project developer internationally in the solar industry, and I really wanted to, again, do these smaller scale projects, and with a very different focus, not on making 100 times as much money on a 100 megawatt project as you can on a 1 megawatt project, but by building a business that does 1 mega projects over and over again and repeats and improves over time and spreads the benefits of these in the regions. We talk a lot about regional opportunities that renewable energy can create, but that can only happen if you really spread it widely. And my mantra is that solar farms should be as common as farm sheds in Australia. They should just be absolutely everywhere. And that's where Jonathan and I met about 6 years ago. We were actually both supporting pro bono a Kaura microgrid around an anaerobic digestion project. So we met at a cafe in Kaura, both supporting the same community group from different angles. And we got talking, and the rest is history, as you would say. Some of the work that we do is just listed here. I don't want to go into too much detail, but all of these projects have a community angle, and sometimes the community ambition is quite clearly formulated. Sometimes it is still in the making. The Grongroom Solar Farm is probably our most high-profile project. We did Australia's first crowd equity raise for a solar farm just back in May, June this year. It was very successful, and it's also hosting the Haystack Solar Garden, which is currently raising, which is Australia's first large-scale solar garden. Another project that you will hear from a lot is the Goulburn Community Solar Farm. Quite amazing. The community there has raised $2.4 million in the community on a project that has been running for a long time, that was on the brink of collapse just before we approached them and asked whether we could help, and is now about to go into construction. And a whole host of other projects that all have an element of either being community-led or with interest for community finance, or with community interest for providing cheaper power to the local community. Most of these projects have an angle of that nature. We'll come back to practical examples that and lessons that we have learned from that work. Now, when we started working with the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, one thing that we did there was working across a number of different activities. And this was just sort of a number of initiatives that we were looking at. One area was bulk buys, solar bulk buys and heat pump bulk buys. And what we realized in that field, community can actually carry a lot, because there's a fair bit of expertise in community groups about running bulk buys. And really the only help that Komo Energy can provide is helping with some of the setup, maybe helping with some of the content creation for blog posts and videos and the like. But beyond that, it is really within the power and ability of a community group to work in that field. There was an area, Helen can probably talk about this by far more than we can. Helen's group in Bunyip managed to get LED lighting into the recreation reserve. And that's a fantastic activity, because it reduces evening demand. Evening demand is the one that is hardest to offset with renewables, because it's after the hours of solar. And it's typically sporting fields only have an energy demand in the evening hours. So anything you do to reduce that energy demand, so energy efficiency rather than renewable energy, is a fantastic benefit. Now, that is a field, I think Helen can probably speak to this. It was primarily advocacy and promoting and researching the opportunities and getting council to do some work around that. And that is work that, well, they did obviously very clearly without our support. So it can absolutely be done by community groups without industry support. And it shows that industry doesn't always have a leg up on any of these activities. To the contrary, here it was the commitment that Helen and her group put in order to achieve that.
But then add that we've also got solar lighting into the Rec Reserve car park now. We've received grants from the local community shop and put 5 or 6 solar lights in their car park. But we have had a setback with the LED lighting for the football oval. Their lights had actually, their halogen lights had actually completely died. And so they are hopefully, as a stopgap measure, getting the old soccer lights when the soccer lights are replaced with LED, which is imminent. And the footy ground are hopefully, as I say, as a stopgap measure, getting their old halogen lights. But hopefully we haven't lost our spot on the list of clubs for replacing with LED. So we're continuing to advocate. I've written a very strong letter to the Shire saying, this is only a stopgap. I understand they've got to have lights, but please don't put us lower down. So we're continuing. It's a battle.
But then a lot of community groups have ambition for mid-scale or community scale solar and storage projects. And the angle that we'll be taking throughout the session today is that you're all members of a committee of a community renewable energy group, like Helen is or like Jeff is. I don't know whether any one of the other ones is on a community renewable energy association. But just imagine you decided you want to, go beyond the interest in these 4 sessions here and join a local group that is working in that field. And there's a spot on the committee and you are voted onto the committee. Normally it doesn't require any prior skills and you learn on the job. And I want you to effectively put yourself into the shoes that you are a member of the committee of one of these associations. And we'll be talking, because this is where the industry collaboration will probably be most important, a lot about the idea of a mid-scale solar and storage project. Just one more thing that we've done when we triaged with various ideas with Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, we looked at activities as they would have impact on climate, direct impact on climate. So the more impact on climate they have, the higher up they sit in this field. And then the question as to how much effort would be required and how much would we have the ability to achieve that. So the more effort for achieving it, the further to the right it sits. And as you can see, there are a number of things that have, that sit on the bottom left corner of this quadrant. Expert eco-checks, sustainability houses, home energy efficiency advisory course that can be achieved with relatively little effort. And I don't want to belittle the effort. It was still quite an effort to put together educational programs for Jeff, and that was successful. But there's no immediate climate impact. Probably energy efficiency advisory course is a bit more because you must train the trainer that then go out into the community. So that sits closer to climate impact. Helen's activity with the Bunyip LED lighting, again, modest amount of effort required, but a very significant climate impact because it immediately reduces energy demand and thereby emissions. And if you then look at, say, solar bulk buys, if you do a solar bulk buy, it reduces emissions by producing more renewable energy, but the effort is significantly higher. This is again something that we achieved in the Yarra Valley Community Power Hub, bulk buys. But if you then look at areas such as mid-scale solar and storage, the effort is significantly higher. But if you achieve them, the impact is very high as well, because it's, say, you might build a megawatt solar farm in 3 or 4 years' time, which has a very significant climate impact, but it is also an enormous effort to get there. And this is an area where we feel that community partnerships are really important. So the way we've always approached this, we are here to support. We are willing to lead. We don't have to lead, but we're willing to lead. We're happy to take the load, but we don't have to take the load. So we tailor our engagement with community groups to what they need. And we're working with Energize Gloucester, for example, and their group is actually really, really well resourced. They've got a former construction manager in there. They've got a former manager for wind farm land acquisition. They have a town planner. So they have a number of skills that are really useful for their solar farm project. So they take by far more a lead than other community groups on other projects. And that's fine. We can dovetail into that and we can support where it's most needed. But what we want to ultimately achieve, we want to build capacity in the community groups. We want the skills that at the moment are quite niche. We want that to proliferate. We want everyone to have these skills because that's the only way to get hundreds and thousands of solar farms and community batteries up. We want local engagement and we want to partner and collaborate. We are a small business. We are 2 founders. We now have 1 full-time staff. We have a couple of part-time staff. We're about to employ someone else, but we're a small business. We can't be in every location that needs a solar farm. So for us, partnering with communities is also helping us to actually find a footprint. And this is something that's a theme that will come back in one of the next slides. Now, This slide comes from the International Association for Participation, and they've developed a spectrum for participation. This is a really, really interesting tool. It talks to commercial developers as to how they should engage with the community. And the Victorian government has actually made this framework part of their community participation guidelines for solar farm development or renewable energy development. And in the last VRET auction, where large projects can bid for government contracts, they said you can't even apply for this government contract unless you have at least achieved stage 2 or stage 3 of this increasing amount of community participation. So the lowest level is inform. The next one is consult. The next one is you involve them in the decision making. You collaborate, where you seek actively sort of the better outcomes from the community, or you empower, where you make it really a community project, where you say the community is the ultimate decision maker. So it's various layers of information and participation rights, right up to decision making, from 1 to 5. Now, a lot of developers obviously develop because they want to make decisions as to how to run each of these solar farms and how to run these businesses. So they might have an inclination to be more on the left-hand side of that spectrum, inform and consult and maybe involve, whereas a lot of community groups obviously want to make decisions about their future. And I think this is where these stages of community engagement actually almost fall short. They speak to commercial developers. They don't speak to community energy groups that actually want to take a strong role in a project, but need support from industry. And this is something that will come out in our work together in the next 2 hours. We're actually talking almost exclusively to community energy groups that already have started some work, that have gone on the journey of developing a solar farm or similar, but that got stuck and need help to actually take this further. So it's actually no longer about community engagement, but community collaboration, because the community is already engaged and is already active. Now, had I known that Helen comes up on this call, I would have probably used the Bunny project as an example. This was actually an example out of the Yarra Valley work that we've done. Clean Energy Nillumbik asked us whether we could do a solar farm on the Pretty Hill former landfill site. So there's a fairly substantial area of land, a capped landfill site in council ownership, and they wanted to see whether we can do a solar farm there. And this is effectively what I want you to imagine now. Imagine you were Clean Energy Nillumbik, or we can just call it a community renewable energy group, that says we want to do a solar farm on a landfill site. It's an area that can't be used for agriculture. It has toxic waste in the ground. It's capped, it's safe, but it has no immediate other benefit to the community. And let's assume, so we effectively explored a number of different scales here in terms of a high-level design, concept design. But what we really came out at is a relatively modestly sized project that takes up only about 1.2 hectares of land. And so that would be about $2 million investment ultimately, and is a scale that a lot of communities have achieved in the past. So that's what we're going to look at. Now, what happens next is, say your group is not as lucky as the Gloucester community with lots of specialist skills internally, but it is a group like Hillsville Core, ambitious people that want to do the right thing for the environment, but might not have the technical expertise. So you've identified where you want to go, but now you need technical expertise, possibly even to draw up this first concept design. What is the first challenge that you actually have? And here's where I would love you all to come on screen, show your faces, and unmute yourself. The discussion will begin. Fee, how would you start? You're sitting around a kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, and somebody says, we should really do that solar farm on the Pretty Hill landfill site. Where to from there?
Well, I have my own example,
Yeah.
and I think it's about starting to talk to people, engage those that are involved.
Mhm.
I think.
So I'm on your committee as well. Yeah, Fee, you're right. You should really talk. We don't even know what it looks like, do we?
Okay, so do we need a mud map, a bit of a work out what we want it to look like?
Well, if you want to go to council, you really need to show them a plan, don't you?
Yeah.
They can't visualize anything without a plan.
Okay. So something visual.
Robin, are you an engineer?
Sorry?
Robin, are you an engineer?
Oh, Robin.
Rachel, are you an engineer? So who's going to draw the plan? So this actually, just unmute yourself, all of you, unless you're in a noisy background, so that we can talk more freely.
So do we need to engage some sort of an expert who can provide us with some direction in building a model or something for it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what you need. Now, I'm actually also the treasurer of your group. I've opened that tin box. There are about $7.50 left from last year's membership takings.
To put out to your community, something out on the local community Facebook page. If anyone's got the skills.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one way of finding skills, and that's effectively my next slide. How can we source expert advice that you need? What are the potential sources of that expert advice? So I think, Helen, you, without having seen a preview of the slides, have probably taken the first line here. You're looking at, sorry, I need to come out of my presenter mode because we're going to fill this table together. So you say, reach out to the community and see whether anyone can help. What is the problem if you ask for, so pro bono advice means that people work for free. You have no money to pay them. So, but it might not take much. It took me about 2 hours to produce these drawings on a software that we use. And I'm not even an engineer, so it's a software that you can use, but you need to subscribe for it, and that costs about 15,000 euro a year. So let's assume we don't have that available. Say an engineer would need to spend a few hours drawing this up by hand. So you need to reach out to the community for help and see whether somebody can help. What is the problem, though? What are the considerations that you need to apply when you ask for pro bono advice?
You've got to have a relationship with the community already, I think. Community needs to know that your community energy group exists and is working for the community.
Yeah.
So you've got to have built up a relationship. Perhaps even the Shire can put you on to somebody, local council. We've got quite a good relationship with the environmental officer at our local council. He might have been able to help.
Yeah. Is it unproblematic to ask people to do things for free, or is there any problem in that?
Depends on your relationship.
Depends on the relationship. Any other?
And their passion, I guess. People would do it if they're passionate.
Yeah. I've provided pro bono advice from time to time as a lawyer. What I need to look at is again, that is a small business, as a small business owner, do I actually have the capacity? So quite often what happens is that people take on pro bono engagements, especially larger ones, in periods when it's quiet, because they feel I can stay involved, I can do something for the community, I don't need to make that money from that group because there is no money, but I can do that work. And I'm not busy at the moment, so I sign up for it. Then they get busy again. And suddenly there's a risk that the pro bono mandate is the second tier mandate and things take longer. Or the other thing that happens that's probably more with larger consulting organizations is that the partner says, yeah, we'll do that pro bono, but then they put a junior person on that might not have all the expertise that is needed with only very limited senior involvement. So the availability is a question mark, and the question of seniority.
I think an issue in relation to this, Gerald, also relates to volunteers on the community energy group who might be very enthusiastic in consulting with professionals to do this work, but then they get busy in their lives. Family issues come up and so on. And they simply are not available on a regular basis to do the work that they originally committed to. And we have this problem all the time with Hillsville Core because you don't have professional staff that you can call on. You can't make demands on volunteers. You're totally dependent on their willingness to put the labor in their spare time. It's very, very difficult.
Okay. In terms of other sources of that expertise that you need, I've listed a few there. There might be others. Who would like to pick another one? And imagine you're sitting around the kitchen table. Okay, Helen had her go at finding someone in the community. Say she was unlucky. There was nobody in the area. So you might need to actually find a different strategy. Who would like to explore another strategy? And you can pick one of those here.
You could pitch your idea to a business.
Yeah.
Like RACV Solar or someone like that.
So that would be supplier funding. So you, RACV Solar is obviously a supplier of solar. And you could say to them, I want to do the solar farm. Can you help me? And quite often they will say, yes, we will. What considerations do you need to apply?
And you're locked into using them for the development, I guess.
Yeah. So that's a question of exclusivity. They will say, yes, I help you and I don't charge you for it, but you need to use me. So, and what can that lead to ultimately? Can lead to uncompetitive pricing. So it can be more expensive.
Oh, yeah.
And what I've seen, and this is an example from our Goulburn project, which has probably a lot of examples to learn from. They were actually speaking to a supplier for a very specific type of mounting structure. And that supplier went above and beyond helping them, but on demanding that their mounting structure would be used. Now, the project didn't proceed because it still didn't stack up, and there were actually a lot of mistakes in what that supplier had put forward. But you're also locked into a specific technology selection, namely the technology selection that the supplier proposes. And that's not always the optimal technology selection. So it can lock in a suboptimal technology selection. But having said all that, it is a valid way of funding early activities. And you can even potentially go to a couple of suppliers and say, hey, I have this idea for this project. Can you give me a concept as to what you would do? And you might get 2 different or 3 different concepts, which will educate you as to the range of possibilities. But if you don't go exclusive with a supplier, the amount of effort they're willing to put in will be quite limited. How about the next item, grant funding? It's probably one that Jeff can talk about a fair bit, but he's not a participant here and he has heard this before, so I might bar him for the moment at least. Can grant funding give you the funding to do, say, $5,000 of concept engineering? You're sitting around the kitchen table, the red wine is nearly done. It's 9 o'clock. We reach for government.
I'd imagine not. Yeah. There you go.
I was just going to say there might not be I don't know whether there's specific grant funding or not, but there might be loans available as well for such projects.
Who would provide those loans?
Well, I don't know. I know in Scotland that the council provides them. They'll actually provide you a loan for either renewable energy or energy efficiency, and you just pay that back to the council.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you probably need to know the risk benefits of what you're applying for, of what you're actually committing, and then you also probably need expertise for someone to help you complete the grant funding application, so you actually know what you're getting yourself into.
You need some sort of preliminary feasibility, I would think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, in order to apply for a grant.
Yeah.
Probably start with a pilot, sort of.
Yeah. So for me, the first question is, again, this is kitchen table, it's 905. Who actually currently has a grant open? So you can't always just go to a council or a state government and say, hey, I need some money, can I have some place? But normally they have rounds of funding that they open, and they open on a competitive basis. So you need to ask yourself what grants are open, and do they cover what you needed to cover? Then the second question, the next question is, if there is one, when is it open? Or until when? When or until when? So you might have had a situation where there was a grant available for pre-feasibility for solar farms for community energy groups, but darn it, that closed 4 weeks ago. So we have to wait another 6 months until the next round opens. But if you have a grant available that you can go for, then you need to either have the skill internally, or you might even need expertise to help you write that grant application. That's, I think, what Rachel was referring to a moment ago. So you need expertise for the grant funding, and you need to talk about your project in a knowledgeable way. What we find is that the better and the more targeted your grant application is, the more knowledgeable it speaks to the subject matter, the more likely you are to get that grant funding. So almost the more you know, the less you need it, the more likely you are to get it.
I think also you're not necessarily going to get the full amount that you ask for as well. So you've got to have that leeway or contingency if you only get part of the funding. Yep.
Or you might need in-kind contributions. So that means that you actually need to deliver some funding or some time at least yourself. That's quite a common requirement. And then, so we've actually done it. We've applied, and it comes back and they say, so this 4 months later, no, sorry, we're oversubscribed. So you have waited for 4 months. You were lucky that you could apply. You waited for 4 months, but you were unsuccessful. So what is your plan B? So grant funding is a great opportunity for a lot of things, and Yarra Valley Community Power Hub is one of these examples. It was a great opportunity for Hillsville Core to set this up and work with 6 other groups to progress opportunities. But it was also lucky that we got that. In the federal microgrid grant that we've done with Jeff, we were unlucky. We thought it was a really good concept, a really strong idea, but the project was not yet sufficiently developed for them to take it seriously. So we were not far enough down the line of having something formed for them to say, yes, we put more money behind that.
So you come back to the need for the advice or for the expertise in the first place of developing some sort of a model for what you're trying to do.
Exactly. So that is sort of that's the revolving theme that I'm trying to explore here. Why we talk as a business about these collaborations. So the own funding, Helen, would you be able to open the coffers of Bunyip Renewable Action Group and say we pay $5,000 for a concept?
No way.
And
we've got a little bit more money now than we had, but that's only thanks to a foundation providing us with some support. But no, we wouldn't. I think we've got about $1,000 in the bank.
Yeah, and in the last call I had Ray from Clean Energy Nuremberg here on this call, and he said exactly the same. There's just not enough funding in community renewable energy groups through membership contributions or small donations that would allow that to happen. Donations and at-risk loans, I think actually that's probably what Fee was talking about earlier. I might actually move that up here and remove that one. I think that's great. The problem with a loan is if you have to repay it, you need to know that you can repay it. If you want to develop a solar farm, I'd normally tend to say when you start, you've got a 99% certainty of failing. Maybe 1% chance of success. And it takes a lot of work to actually move it up that risk profile, where it is by far likely to succeed than fail. So I personally would not take on a loan on something that is very unlikely to succeed. So can it be repaid? Or is it a grant that a loan that can be forgiven?
Also, would you need to know if you are successful, how long, like of payback period would be as well?
Yeah,
take that into consideration for like interest or whatever.
Yeah. The next category of sources of funding I have is community fundraising. So could you actually set up, say, a cooperative, which is, Haystacks is organized as a cooperative. Goulburn Community Solar Farm is set up as a cooperative. Gloucester has set up a cooperative. Manila has set up a cooperative. Cooperatives are a fairly common fundraising tool. We would actually suggest that crowd equity should also be, because it's actually in some ways easier. But whichever way you go, could you raise funds in the community to pay for some of this expertise that you need? So in fact, we set up a vehicle, raise funds in the community. There are permissible ways to do that, and then pay for the expertise. Is that a viable option?
I think most communities would be quite reluctant to raise money with no certainty of reward. Like for a feasibility study, I think perhaps more likely once you've got your feasibility study and you're wanting to build, you'd have more chance of raising money for that than you would for something that may not succeed and not go ahead.
I think that's exactly the issue. And the initial amounts that you need, while they're significant, like, say $5,000 for a concept design, $5,000 to the legal documentation around securing the land, they're significant amounts, but they're still modest in the scheme of a, say, $2 million fundraise that might ultimately be required. Would you really go through the process of setting up a cooperative, raising funds in the community, and in order to pay for $5,000? It can be over the top in the early stages. And I think what Helen was speaking to there a moment ago is absolutely spot on. The community, there will be some people that are just committed to the project and that will be happy to put some money at risk. But the vast majority of people will put money into a community fundraise in order to make however modest financial return. They won't do it just for the love of it. And if you put money into a development and the development doesn't succeed, you suddenly have a disgruntled community that has lost money. So that's not a good outcome. It can actually do more harm than good for community renewables more generally. The last category is what we call sweat equity, and that's actually to an extent a similar concept to what we propose in our collaboration model, but it's slightly different. Does anyone know what sweat equity is? It's a concept that is quite well known in the startup world. Does anyone has ever heard of that? No? So this is when, imagine you have a startup business, say you want to set up an IT business, you've got a brilliant idea, but you need some really high-end computer equipment or you need a specialist skill. Say you know that part of IT, but not that part. So you say to a mate of yours whom you know has that skill, do you want to help me get this off the ground? You do that work, and I give you 20% of my business. So you give equity in the business. You give part ownership of the business to someone who provides you with a skill that you don't have. It's a really interesting model. It's widely practiced in the startup world, and in some ways you could say a new solar farm is a startup business. But there's a significant challenge with that. Can you imagine what that challenge is? Because I say, can you do this job for me? Say we go to the engineering consultant. Can you do the engineering for us? And initially we need a concept engineering, and then there are other things, and maybe overall there's $400,000 of engineering that we would otherwise pay for. And the person says, yeah, I'd like 50%, please. What do we say to that? Do we say, that sounds great, let's go? Or do we need to say, well, you should really not have more than 20% of the project because it's just the engineering of the project and we still need to fund the actual construction. So this is normally discussed in the context of valuation of sweat equity contributions. How much is it actually worth? And it's probably normally a bit, it's worth more than the consulting service because you don't have to pay for it and it comes early on and it's very much at risk. But how do you value those services? So how do you value a contribution in a project? And the second problem that they have with that is information imbalance. So the partner that you're trying to bring in knows better what their services are worth than you do, because you're actually not skilled in that field. So you would almost need advice from someone else as to how to engage someone over here on a sweat equity basis in order to make that a sound model. Now, interestingly, you all had a pretty good grasp of all the other categories, but sweat equity seemed to be less familiar. And we had the same in the course on Wednesday. I find that really fundraising, and I promised Jeff that I will organize a webinar on using sweat equity to fund development activities, because I think it's a really interesting tool, and I think it can be done. Because as long as you have connections in the renewable energy world, you should be able to find someone that can help you to just assess, how much should this person over here charge for this work? And how much more do I have to give them to do it as sweat equity rather than as a paid for service? And because it's early and at risk, that is actually something that people should be able to assess relatively well. And getting that help should be relatively easy. So we now explored a number of different ways as to how to fund that first concept design that we said we need to put together. So
can I just ask a question on that?
Yes,
sorry.
Yeah,
would you need to get like legal advice or get a contract drawn up about that sweat equity? Like, how do you, like, is it just a handshake?
Well, it really depends. And we're currently supporting one community renewable energy group. I can't name the name because it's a bit of a sensitive topic at the moment. They're working with a commercial developer, larger commercial developer. And I'm not sure it was ill will. It was maybe just very poor management of that relationship. But they effectively only had a handshake. And it's going really, really sour. I was hoping to have that person on the session here today to talk about their experience, but because we're actually trying to help, we're trying to help them, the community group, to bring the relationship back on track and to give them the confidence to proceed. And we might actually be able to get to that point. So I can't actually name the project, and I can't bring her on as a speaker. I would have loved to have her on here. But yes, so what we have seen, we're obviously also observing what other developers do in community engagements, where the relationship, no relationship is always smooth. There are always bumps in a relationship. It's like a marriage. You're trying to build a long-term relationship in a project, and you go through stressful times and less stressful times. And say Goldman will have had its frustrations with us, but we're still working together, and we're getting to the point we're about to build 3 years later. Where the relationships seem to be relatively stable in the long term between community and commercial developers, where people have actually gone through the effort of drawing up a contract, and making very clear what each organization's role in the project is. So defining those roles and putting a contract behind that is really important. And the other thing that, so defining roles is the one thing that is really important, and making sure that the community group has actually a firm foothold of one shape or the other in the project is the other critical one. So ultimately, as a commercial counterparty with opposite a community group, you need to be prepared that the community group ultimately takes over or enforces its rights. That's an unpalatable prospect for anyone, also for the community groups, but ultimately that's what you, I think, need to expose yourself to. Only if you accept that as a potential ultimate consequence will you have a true partnership with the community. The way we do this, and we can talk about that a bit later on, is we give the communities a call option over the project. So they can actually boot us at any time. They pay us out for our work, but they can boot us anytime. There's another developer that is behind the Orange solar farm in New South Wales that has entered into a shareholders agreement with the community because the community wanted to only take a partial stake. And they told us it took them a long time to negotiate that because it's negotiating a 40, 50-page document with a community group. It's not an easy undertaking, not even for professionals. But they went through the process, and that seems to work. And the community has raised, I believe, about $3 million, and is now looking to even increase their stake. But they had to go through the process ultimately to define not only their roles, but also enter into a contract. And wherever community groups and commercial counterparties do that, it seems to work okay, despite the occasional upset and hiccup in the relationship. But where the commercial party just brushes over that and says, here's a handshake, we'll sort it later, that is where there's a real danger that the community is left behind. So that's a very good point. Okay, now let's have a look at this one. So why should a community and industry engage? Who is good at what? So I've got tiles here that I want to move around, and I want to see whether the community has a high expertise or a low expertise, or whether the industry has high expertise or low expertise. And let's see where we come out. I might guide this a little bit, and this can be a relatively quick exercise. So site selection. Who can find a site better than the other party? Does the community have expertise in finding a site for our solar farm? Remember, we looked at that Pretty Hill landfill site.
I think the community would have more expertise.
Yep. So community knew there's the Pretty Hill landfill site. Nobody is doing anything there. Was capped about 20 years ago. We as Komo Energy, we wouldn't know that. How would we? But is there a role where the industry has expertise in site selection?
Knowing whether it's a feasible site or not.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So I just went to the Mornington Peninsula last week and looked at a couple of sites, and one of the community groups down there showed us a site, and they were really quite enthusiastic, and they had their reasons why they wanted that site, and it was just outside the development envelope. The developer owns the land but can't really develop it, so they should really put a solar farm there. Great. We couldn't know that. They knew it because they had actually, the president there had actually bought one house in that development, so they knew everything about the area. They're on the committee of the body corp, so they knew that. I looked at the site with different eyes. I looked at, can this be screened? Impact on neighbors, proximity to transport, proximity to power lines. These are things that I looked at. So I think industry also has expertise in site selection, but differently. So both parties can work together on selecting a site. Who knows more about the site history?
Community.
I think that's absolutely right. In Goulburn, the site was for the Goulburn Dispatchable Solar Farm industrial area was actually used as a fuel storage, and there's contamination in the soil. Would we have found that? No. not even our searches would have revealed that. It was the local knowledge that we needed. So industry normally has a relatively low ability to assess site history. What about the planning process? How do you get your development approval, planning approval? Who is better at that? What expertise does the community have?
Community might have a relationship with the Shire Council already.
Yep. So pretty good in that field. What about industry?
They'd be able to provide the technical details, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. So again, similar to site selection, both have their strengths in that field, but both also have weaknesses in that field. So I'm putting them probably a bit further down because they're nobody's perfect in that field. Now, when we come to technology selection, technology selection, where does the community sit with that?
I think not particularly high.
Yep.
I'd say low.
Yep. And industry?
High.
Definitely had expertise, yeah.
What about community engagement?
Community's got the expertise there. That'd be pretty high.
I'd say very high. And industry?
Industry would provide backup there, I would think.
I'd at best put industry somewhere in the middle here. I don't think that industry is particularly good at doing local engagement.
You just put the engineering there rather than the engagement.
Oh, sorry. And let's see with engineering. Where does industry sit with engineering?
They've got the expertise there.
Yeah.
High.
Community?
Low.
Probably low.
Yeah. Network studies. This is the dark art of community scale development. So if you want to connect a one-megawatt solar farm to the network, you need to undertake network studies. So this is where, say, AusNet tests whether you connecting and running the solar farm will actually blow up the grid in the area. Where does the community sit on that front?
Low.
Low.
I'd say actually very low. And industry, I would love to say very high. It's unfortunately a dark art even for industry. So I put it at the same level as engineering. Construction?
Low for community.
I would say low, but not as low as, say, the engineering side, because, you know, there's sometimes expertise around construction. It's a more accessible topic. And for industry, I would actually also put it more middling, because there is not much expertise in constructing community scale solar farms. And we feel that very strongly on our Grongkrong and Goulburn project at the moment. Being mid-scale, they're too small for the large contractors and too big for the really small residential and commercial solar contractors. So we actually find it really hard to find good expertise in that field. So I might actually push this down a little bit. How about financing expertise? The last tile.
I would think both of them have a reasonably high understanding of it, but it'd be different from their understanding would be different for different reasons.
Yeah, I think that's where it would come out as well, Robin. If you want to do a community fundraise, the community knows better where to go. They know who might be sort of the anchor investor, you know, the person that made money in the IT boom, or who runs a construction business that has made some money recently. Whereas in terms of structuring, probably industry knows better as to how to do that. So what I wanted to show here is communities lack some skills that are necessary for community scale renewable energy projects. So the larger projects at a community scale, but they have some very distinct skills. What they need to do, these communities, they need to supplement the skills where their own skills are low, and they need to contemplate what skills they are strong at. So what does the community have to contribute to the development? And it is that activity where you then need to decide, okay, I've got skills to offer. Do I also have the capacity? Do I have the volunteer manpower to actually offer that to a commercial counterparty. It's no good to have the skills if you can't find the time to deploy them. But what I wanted to draw out, a lot of communities actually have something to contribute. The areas that are not highly technical, more the areas that sometimes require manpower, like a financing process. It's literally sometimes a door knocking exercise, or that require site history, local knowledge, local relationships to council and to neighbors. And, you know, there's the cantankerous old man next door that needs to be dealt with. And so there's a lot of local knowledge that communities can support with. The question is only how much time can they muster in order to do that. So I hope that was an interesting exercise. It shows that actually neither can completely do it on their own. And before we take a short break, I just wanted to do one more exercise here. Why should community and industry engage is again the question. And that is the question, who has what risk appetite? So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the risk initially is very high, and over time it comes down. And towards the end, it is low, and the project goes into construction. And that's a really challenging journey. It's challenging for the entire industry, for commercial developers, for investors, for contractors, for anyone who wants a new energy asset built. And the cost is inverse. Initially, the cost is relatively low. $5,000 is low in this context. But then cost goes up, and then cost plateaus in the development, and then it has been de-risked, and it can go into construction. So red to me is again industry, and green is community. Where do you think the community would want to be engaged primarily? What risk and cost profile could the community tolerate?
Very low.
So
both.
Low risk or low cost?
Both.
Okay, so you say we can only do something if it has no risk and no cost attached?
Or minimum.
Any other views on that?
I would think the community wants to be engaged early in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they don't have the funds to be able to have a high cost attached, but they probably accept more of the risk at this stage, the early stage.
Yeah.
Because,
so long as they didn't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or it's such a small amount that you have been able to raise it somehow. Okay. What about once it goes into construction? So the risk is now very low.
Industry would be interested in participating at that stage if it's got low risk and if the risk is low, the cost is high, then industry would be more likely to be engaged.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Any alternative views on that?
The community, once they know it's less risk, would possibly want to be involved also at that stage. But yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think that
they'd want to be, but whether they could afford to be, whether they could manage to raise the funding.
Yeah, okay, but that's now there's a cost, there's a defined cost, and the only question is whether you can fund it. But the community could accept an environment where the cost is high, but there's a low risk. Because if you go to the community and say, let's fund the solar farm together on Pretty Hill landfill side, all the work has already been done. And it's now just about building it. I think that is actually a proposition that you could take to your community. Where I thought we would get to is something like this. But I'm always happy to learn new things, and I will. Sorry. So I put both here as industry. Sorry, industry, to my mind, needs to help in the middle. So initially, the community can get things off the ground, can develop ideas to a point where the cost curve stops the community from progressing further. That's, to my mind, where the industry needs to come in and help the project up the hill. Once it's up the hill, it can bring the community back in because it's now low risk. There's a fundraise that is required, but the community can actually take that risk because it's now a very low risk. So we could say here, community is subject to fundraising.
Would there be return then on the fundraising?
Yes, there should
from
be.
the investors?
Yeah, there should be. And I just wanted to give, we've got sort of 3 cost categories here. And I just wanted to give you an idea as to where that can land, pun intended. Securing the land, you need to think about a cost of roughly $5,000. And that is just legal cost. Lawyers on 2 sides. The planning process for a project of this scale, to my mind, would anyone want to hazard a guess?
That would depend on a lot of factors, wouldn't it? So kind of hard to.
$2 million solar farm on a landfill site.
It would be up over $20,000.
Yeah, I'd say somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. And that depends on the amount of studies that you might need to undertake. So you might need to undertake a fair few environmental studies, whether there's additional water runoff that might cause erosion and so on. Grid studies. Any ideas? Anyone hazarding a guess?
What is grid studies?
So this is where you go to AusNet and say, I want to connect a solar farm.
Okay, yeah.
Let's check that technically.
Well, I'd imagine pretty expensive.
10 to 15,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 10, but just completely guessing.
Oh,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we paid, and this is a combination of your own costs, and it depends on which process. It can be less, but if you said it's a solar battery project, it's more. So you pay your own grid modelers, your own engineers typically, and we've just gone through this process successfully on Gronga and Goulburn, fortunately, because else we would have lost a lot of money. And our own grid modelers cost us $120,000 on one project and a little bit less on the other project. And then you pay the network for them to do their work, and that cost us already $70,000 on each of them. But these projects both don't have the form of battery that we were looking at potentially doing on Pretty Hill. So I'd say Pretty Hill would probably have come out at about $250,000.
Wow.
No, Helen, what we're looking to do in Bunyip will probably be cheaper because that is a smaller project that runs under a different process.
Good.
And that's why we were so keen to keep it in that alternative process.
So what's the minimum that you have potentially think it could be? Like, what's the scale from low to, obviously 250 is like, I would hope would be at the very top end.
No, it's not the top end. The top
really?
end is
Okay. Wow.
is sort of $750,000 million. At the very lower end, if you put everything together, probably about $100,000. So let's maybe put this down as a range for community scale.
Wow.
So this is why we advocate collaboration, but I would advocate at this very moment a break of 5 minutes.
And a cup of coffee.
Yeah. So
okay, if you
just put your microphones on, mute your microphones and mute your cameras, and come back in 5 minutes.
I think we probably just need to keep moving. So I might just reshare, and just to round out what we just looked at a moment ago. The reason why I think industry community collaboration is so important is, from my perspective, if you talk about community solar farms on the edge of town, larger community batteries, there's a really big cost hump in the middle that communities can't really manage on their own. Because if they lost that sort of money, imagine you raised $200,000 in the community, and let's assume you can get everything in at the cheapest level of cost. But you come to the end of a grid study, and the network says, no, you can't do it. So you've lost $150,000, $200,000 of community funds that you've raised. You will not be able to walk down the main street again, because people will come after you for having lost their money. And we had that situation, the Gloucester community that I mentioned earlier. We were looking to develop a 500 kilowatt solar farm for them. And we had spent about 18 months and about $50,000 on grid studies. And then the network came back and said, you can't do 500 kilowatt, you can only do 30 kilowatt.
Doesn't that mean then that the risk is actually a bit higher than you've got it noted here? If you've put in that amount of that money and yet you still there's a high risk that you might not be able to go ahead, or at least moderately high risk.
We were sitting somewhere in this part of the curve. We hadn't really spent the really big dollars yet. So we paid the network $35,000. We had to spend some $15,000 on our own engineers to draw up concepts and text selection and undertake grid studies. So we're sitting somewhere here. So risk was very high, and cost was just on the climb. But that money is lost. And while as a business, I don't like the idea of losing that sort of money. When Jonathan and I formed Komo Energy, we said that's actually the missing gap in the center. This is how to get good ideas to become good projects. What happens if that doesn't actually eventuate and a community has spent all that money and loses that money? That's really not a possible proposition. And that's where we said we need to sit in the middle as a business that makes its purpose to work with communities in that segment of the development process. And the only reason why we can do that as a business, and I still hope that it all works out for us ultimately, we're still in the very early stages of all of this, is if we lose money on one project, we can compensate that with earnings on other projects. So because we make a profit in our activities, some of that profit we need to notionally set aside for the projects that we lose along the way. And that's sometimes called a portfolio effect. We can spread losses in one project over every project as a cost item. A community group that does one project at a time can't do that. You might do one project and maybe 5 or 10 years later, you say, it's time to, let's do the next one. But you can't spread the risk of losing everything on one project over other projects. And that's where I think the real proper spot for industry is being a risk taker. And when you take risk, you need to take a return as well. You need to be able to make money despite the fact that you're taking some fairly substantial risks. But you can do that only when you do multiple projects. So that's what I just wanted to sort of round out a bit more. Now, I wanted to look with you at a cooperative disclosure statement. So the Flyers Creek wind farm is in the center west of New South Wales. And this is a document that goes back about 12 years. Actually, no, might be 12 years, might be a bit less. And I was using that document when I was teaching a course on renewable energy law at the University of Queensland, because I thought it was a really, really interesting document. Can I first check who had a chance to read that document?
I had a look at it. I won't say I read the whole document.
Okay. So anyone has read it? No? Okay. In that case, I probably need to. So the community was working with a commercial developer called Infigen, who was recently bought by Iberdrola, a Spanish company. And Infigen was a very large wind developer. And the model they proposed for the Flyers Creek wind farm was to work with the community, to allow the community to invest one wind turbine. A wind turbine costs about $3 million. And they said to the community, why don't you set up a cooperative and fund one wind turbine? So for that purpose, they set up a cooperative. And the document that I sent through to you is effectively the disclosure statement that the cooperative would use to raise money in the community. And that's a model that, for example, Goldman has done. They've raised 2.4 million by now. Haystacks is organized as a cooperative, so it's a very common process. Given that you haven't had a chance to read the document, the participation of the community in this project is effectively as a investor of part. It's not a co-investment. It's a full investment into one part. There's the Sapphire wind farm in the New England region, where the community is also invested, but there it's actually a fractional investment into the overall wind farm. So in Sapphire, the community is a partial investor, so they would be organized through a shareholders agreement. Whereas in the Flyers Creek example, it is an investor of part. And the way that is secured, again, I will probably need to provide you with that, is if they would have been given a license, a land license from Flyers Creek Wind Farm, from Flyers Creek FCWF, Flyers Creek Wind Farm, to build one turbine. And that would have been built for them, and they would have invested it into it. So the Flyers Creek Wind Farm has the land for all these wind turbines, and the community is given a license to use effectively one site. And then plus access to the grid. Now, my first question to you, is that a good model? Do you like that model? Imagine we're 2 years on, we're still sitting over a bottle of red wine around a kitchen table, and we've just been given a proposal from Infigen to set up a cooperative to fundraise and own one wind turbine.
So the community then get the returns from just that one wind turbine.
That's right, yeah.
Being fed into the grid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that the situation of Hepburn Wind as well, that they had that and there was a lot of issues initially?
I think the community actually funded the entire wind farm.
Actually, I think you're right. Yeah.
And that was only 3 turbines.
Yeah.
How easy is it to determine how much one wind turbine is producing?
Easy.
Yeah, okay.
There would be a power meter in the middle.
So it would probably be quite a good arrangement, wouldn't it? I mean, the community can then say that, yes, they own that wind turbine.
Yeah. So
rather than saying, oh, we earn 5% of the whole lot.
Yeah, and I think that's why they probably did it. It's a very tangible outcome for the community. You can rally around wind turbine quite literally, and say this is our wind turbine. That's better than, oh, we've got this notional fractional entitlement to 5% of something big. You can say this is our wind turbine. I think that was the key driver behind this, and I'm not the one to criticize the model, because I'm sure they did it for a good reason. What I don't like about it is actually comes from a different angle. Wind turbines have outages.
Yeah.
Wind turbines need spare parts. Wind turbines need maintenance. Some of the maintenance requires large cranes. Imagine there's a spare parts pool on site. There are 100 wind turbines, 5 of them fail. Which one gets repaired first? The network operator tells Flyers Creek Wind Farm wind farms are what is called semi-scheduled generators. So the network, the energy market operator AEMO can tell semi-scheduled generators to regulate down So while there is wind blowing, they can say, please turn your wind turbines out of the wind and don't produce, or produce less. How do we know that Flyers Creek Wind Farm is not just regulating down the community rather than one of its own turbines? So there are technical and operational interfaces with Flyers Creek Wind Farm where the community could be at a disadvantage. And I'm not saying this can't be done, but it will require a lot of expertise in the community to have the foresight to see those problems coming and to regulate them adequately. So for example, the availability of spare parts, say if there's, some of these spare parts are very, very expensive. And there might only be one spare part on site. Say 5 are needed. How do we regulate who gets that one spare part? How do we make sure it's on a non-preferential basis? How does the community know that it even needs a spare part, whereas the operator within Flyers Creek Wind Farm will probably have visibility. Oh, this is shutting down, this is shutting down, this is shutting down. I'll tell the community last. These are risks that need to be managed. They can absolutely be managed. And I don't know how they were managed there. But these are risks that need to be managed. And the management of that risk requires, again, a lot of expertise. And that's probably my issue with that particular structure of community collaboration. This is where a fractional entitlement, we own 5% of this entire wind farm, is actually easier, because then you're always fractionally participating in all the events. And that means you're never put at a disadvantage because you own a physically separated portion of the wind farm. So these are 2 different models. Each of them has advantages and disadvantages, but I think the very tangible outcome for the community was probably the reason why they said they would go down this route.
Good photo op.
Pardon me?
A good photo op in front of their wind turbine.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Infigen actually did something fairly unique, I would say. It supported the community in engaging with Infigen. And what they did is they sent a senior employee effectively on secondment to the cooperative that has been formed as a director into the cooperative. So the community, so the cooperative had one director from the wind developer to provide technical and commercial expertise. What do you think about that idea?
What was the cost involved of his?
I think that was actually paid by Infigen.
Okay.
So the co-op didn't have a cost for that.
I think that sounds fairly generous of the cooperative.
Yeah.
Generous proposal.
Yeah.
The developer, sorry, yeah.
And it really speaks to the fact that the community has a few areas where it needs expertise that is unlikely to be present in the community. There won't be many communities where there's a retired wind farm operator living in that community. Not yet. That will come. I think in 20 years' time, this question won't even arise. You can probably pick from 3 different people living in your community.
It's probably also in the developer's interest to make sure that that one wind turbine's working properly. So, and to ensure it's maintained and that sort of thing. So I guess it was a win-win.
Yeah, that was actually taken care of by Flyers Creek Wind Farm anyway. So they would do the maintenance of the wind farm altogether, including that one turbine. But it's having a knowledgeable person on the other side is actually really important. I think this was definitely the spirit with which this was offered. Is it also problematic at the same time?
I mean, to me, it kind of sounds like the groundskeeper that you're living on site kind of thing. So it's having someone who would want to actually do that. I mean, would you have enough people in the community that could support all of these different initiatives that are going on, that are willing to relocate or whatever to be part of that?
In this case, the cooperative is effectively an investor in that one wind turbine. The technical aspects are already looked after. This person that was effectively seconded from the developer would be sitting on the board of directors, and they would meet, say, 4 times a year, review technical information, discuss, the next community event, would review the financials, and the technical expert on the board would be able to guide a lot of things and would say, okay, these revenues are really down, but that's because the power prices have dropped, or power prices have gone up, and that's why we see a spike. It's not because the wind was blowing more. So it's providing that sort of level of expertise and knowledge what's going on in the industry, and to be able to, for the board to discharge its functions properly. So from your perspective, that's great.
As long as he doesn't take control, I suppose.
He's one of many. He's one of many. One of I think 7 or one of 5.
Yeah,
because you'd have to have that relationship, like in that, yeah. You build the rapport.
Okay, now let's role play.
Yeah, the power balance thing.
Yeah. There's a power balance question, and that might come derived from knowledge imbalance. Now let's role play this.
Was there a conflict of interest for having the director who's both on the community and the company?
That's exactly where I was about to go. So let's look back at this example. 5 spare parts are needed. 1 spare part is present. The Flyers Creek Wind Farm replaces the spare puts the spare parts in, replacing a defective part in one of the wind turbines. That's not the community ones. The community board meets and people are fuming. No revenue for 6 months already. The spare part has a lead time of 18 months. They turn to the technical expert seconded and say, what the hell is going on? And that's all proper. There were 5 that were needed. It was put into the first one that went down. Can we really expect completely unbiased technical advice to the cooperative from an employee of the developer that is looking after the remainder of the wind farm? To my mind, actually, when the advice matters the most, the expert is conflicted. Because the advice matters the most when it is about the relationship between the cooperative that owns one of the wind turbines and the manager and operator of the overall wind farm. And I'm not sure how they manage that conflict of interest, because in that situation, as a cooperative board, I would probably not even want to listen to that person. That person should really excuse him or herself for being conflicted. And that means when in the most critical time, when the expertise is most needed, the expertise is not available. So it's there when it's not needed, but it's not there when it's needed. So is there an alternative way that this could have been done?
Well, the percentage idea. Yeah, just having a percentage possibly is better. You could still have your photo taken in front of one wind turbine, though, couldn't you?
Yeah. And what about the idea of getting an expert onto the cooperative board?
It wouldn't be necessary then, would it?
Yes, but if you really like that idea, if you really wanted to stick with that one wind turbine model, so could I suggest that the co-op receives funding to hire a competent director that is not employed. So that
impartial.
Impartial, yeah. So we're not talking about a massive amount of money. Say, we might be talking about sort of $10,000, $15,000 a year to sit on a cooperative board and attend 4 board meetings. Rather than sending the employee would have come cheaper to Infigen. Absolutely. And that's probably why they went down that route. But could the alternative be that they provide the corp with $15,000 a year until maybe the corp can fund it itself to hire someone who is competent but independent?
So you're saying the developer could provide that money to hire someone?
Yeah.
To be the advisor, yeah.
It's a possibility. Ultimately, the co-op could also just say, it's one of our costs of running our business that we need to pay a director's fee to an independent expert that comes onto our board. That's also a possibility.
Would you make enough from your investment to be able to cover that cost?
I think so, yeah.
As well as any maintenance and that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we probably have about 10, maximum 15 minutes before Jeff will throttle my line. And so I wanted to briefly speak about our development model. Now, Helen, a lot of this will be familiar to you because we have actually just on Tuesday signed with the Bunyip Group a collaboration agreement along these lines. So for Helen, this is all very familiar, but for others, it will not be. So what we've come up with to really bring these different strands that we've explored here today together is our community development model. What we normally find is that communities, and I can probably go back into presenter mode, that we find normally that communities have a fairly good ability to undertake some early stage development. And that is often selecting a piece of land where they want to develop something and have an idea what they want to do with it. Now, that ambition is sometimes very broad, and we sometimes have to pare that back a little bit. And that certainly happened with Bragg, with their project. But if you know what the ambition is, then we can develop the project so that it is open to expand that ambition in a future time. What we then normally say is, okay, we take over that project for the late stage development is a terminology that we sometimes use where significant development is done, but it's really sort of that middle phase of the development stage where significant investment is required. We take over that project normally in the form of a company that receives all the land option and the grid connection agreement and the development approval. We put that all into a company that acts like a vessel that can be passed between parties back and forth. And our job is to secure that land, secure the development approval, the grid connection, undertake the procurement for construction, and maybe secure a PPA, a power purchase agreement. We do that, we lead on that, but quite often with significant community involvement. And it depends on the community as to how strongly they want to support that. What the community normally does in parallel is they start marketing the project and set up their community investment vehicle, say a cooperative. And once the project is de-risked, so all the key development tasks have been performed, so we're very close to this point here, at that point, the community takes the project back and takes ownership of the project. And this buyback of that special purpose vehicle or that company is usually at just a nominal value, say $10 for the entire company. And what happens in that moment in which it is taken back, the community needs to fund the vehicle to pay our fees. So Komo Energy doesn't normally receive any fees while it undertakes the development work. Komo Energy doesn't receive any funding for development activities. It needs to fund all of that out of its own balance sheet. And it gets reimbursed for that and paid a pre-agreed fixed fee at the end. I've got a couple of slides that show that in a few steps. So with Komo Energy, and in this case, on Tuesday it was Bragg, we entered into a collaboration option agreement. We set up a company that we hold 100%. And we say we need to hold this 100% because we put all the money in. We put in $250,000, $300,000 into this company in order to develop the project. We can only do that and justify that to our investors if we control that entity. But it is under option, so we can be booted out at any time. And what then happens is the community group normally sets up a separate entity for the fundraising, so that becomes its nominee. So the community says, I want to now exercise my option, but I don't want to take it myself because I'm actually not a fundraising vehicle. But we've set up this co-op over here that has raised $1 million, and they want to now buy that project. So we move the project company over to that nominee entity for $10 only. And in that moment, a project development agreement is activated that reimburses our cost and pays our agreed project fee. That's the model that we normally run. And we've done this with 3 communities already in New South Wales, with a couple of others under negotiation at the moment. We've just entered something like that with Bunyip. We've got more of these proposals currently out, also in Victoria. Any thoughts on this model? It's not the perfect model. And I'd love to hear some pushback here. There must be something that we're not quite getting quite right yet.
But just to clarify, we've got the option with the Bragg project. We've got the option to take over the project, but not the compulsion to.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've just started, just before I went away, just making the community aware that we are progressing this project. We haven't said anything about raising funds yet.
Yeah.
Just want to wait a little while before we hit them with that. But we'll discuss that at our meeting on Wednesday. But yeah, we've got an option to buy in if we think we can raise the funds.
Yeah. So that speaks again to this item here. The community can get involved back here, subject to its own fundraising.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're sort of fairly confident, as if Komo is confident enough to put this money in, we feel it's going to have to give some returns. So we're going to have a very good argument to put to our community that, hey, this is going to work. Yeah.
And the way we normally think and also present that to our community partners is, if ultimately the community does not undertake the fundraise because the return, there's a possibility that community will not take back the project, and that means we don't get reimbursed and we don't get any fees.
However,
so we will only put our money in for as long as we think it's a viable prospect. And that means the community has a greater confidence that what we do is viable, because ultimately, once we've sunk $250,000 or more into the, say, $300,000 into a project, if the community doesn't want to take it forward or cannot take it forward for whatever reason, say Bragg might dissolve by the time, so we suddenly don't have a local partner. If nobody takes the project back, then really our only way is forward. We actually need to self-invest the project to recover our investment. And that ultimately gives the communities a significant amount of confidence that we will only put money in for as long as we think it's viable. Helen, what was your main concern in this entire arrangement? Apart from that, it's of course a complex arrangement.
I think just the thought that we had to, we were concerned that we would have to take it over, just to do the right thing by Komo, I guess.
Yeah.
But now we're confident that if we can't raise the money in our community, that Komo will still go ahead. That took away a big concern, I think, that our group had.
Yeah, I think one of the other concerns that were raised from within your group was whether there's any liability on Bragg.
Yes.
Because Bragg, obviously, like most other community groups, don't have any money in the bank. $1,000 is great to have, but a lot of groups wouldn't even have that. So one of the key things we had to highlight was that this is really a an arrangement where there's no liability, no comeback to brag, because it's really just an option. The only thing they would be liable for is if they started competing with our project, whereby we said you can't compete with the project, you can't just develop one on the paddock just next door. That's the only obligation they undertake, and that we will have to enforce if they don't.
I think initially it was just more understanding the legalities of the contract and that, wasn't it? That we were just sort of, some of the terminologies, this just wasn't in our expertise to understand. But then obviously with your guidance, it sort of helped to understand that. But
Hillsville Core is in a situation at the moment where we're looking at one of these agreements, and there's a lot of pushback from our committee because they don't actually understand the documents, and we need to get some expertise in, and some people want to go to lawyers to get advice, but we don't have money to get that advice. And so the whole thing has just come to a stop. And now we have our AGM, a new committee coming on board. Nobody wants to proceed at this point. I've been the president, the main one driving this whole thing with Komo, and I'm stepping down. So they don't know whether, there's not the knowledge of whether a new president will want to continue with this or not. So it all, when you're dealing with a voluntary group, it all starts to get a little bit messy as well. And there's quite a lot of discussion that's involved. And when you're only having meetings once a month, these projects take quite a bit of time to get going. And I think it's fantastic that Bragg has been able to move forward so relatively quickly on this one. I congratulate you on that.
I mean, we had exactly the same concerns, I think, but But
it's also thanks to the Yarra Valley Power Hub, who've sort of kick-started it by paying Komo the costs, some costs early in the piece, and which has been good.
I think the transparency and the support has been really, important.
And we find that, there's a mix. Some community groups, they just want to understand the mechanism and how that unfolds, and consider the documents otherwise quite readable once they've sort of digested that complexity. And other groups seek very detailed legal advice. And we had literally the entire spectrum where we negotiated for 8 to 12 months to where we sign it within a few days. It really differs quite a bit. I must say the ones where we get challenged on certain items are great for us, because we get our documentation tested, and in some areas we have actually then in our standard improved what we do and how we do it, because we realized that there were still gaps in how that collaboration is not yet fully secured for both parties. So it's a good process to get a challenge, but it's obviously a challenge for community groups to undertake such an engagement. And I think, Rachel, you asked earlier, would you need legal documentation if you had a sweat equity model? Yes, absolutely, you would need that. And that legal documentation doesn't tend to be short form. So that is a significant challenge in these engagement forms. Anyway, that brings me to the end of what I wanted to present today. I do thank you very much for your attention and for your collaboration on this. It's good to hear a variety of views. Are there any last questions? Can you take one or two more?
I just have one quick one, Gerald. Do we have the final plan that you're going to be putting to AusNet in our possession? I know we've had a few different options.
Shall we maybe take that offline?
Okay. It's just we've got a Bunyip Community Market on Sunday, and I'd like to be able to have it up there.
Yeah. Okay. So, we'll do.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take it offline.
Okay. Well, in that case, I hand back to Jeff.
Well, thank you very much, Gerald. Another excellent presentation. I'd like to thank you on behalf of all of the participants today, and on behalf of Hillsville Core and Emerald and Pakenham as well. It's been terrific to have you here and to have the level of professionalism and expertise that you're able to bring to these sessions. And I hope that we'll be able to spread these videos that we've been making of all of the sessions more widely around community energy groups in Victoria and perhaps around Australia. Once they are all available online, we will then start to promote them a little bit more widely. Although we're just a small group here, hopefully a lot of other people will benefit from these videos. So thank you all very much to our participants for attending these 4 sessions. It's amazing that you've stayed through for the whole time that we've been running them. It's quite a commitment on your part as well as our part. So thank you for that. And thank you again to Emerald and Pakenham for their support, the Education Department for their contribution to the funding, and also to Sustainability Victoria and the Victorian Government. As you know, I'm president of Healesville Core, and of course, it is Healesville Core who has been that has done the work to mount this program after the hub closed down. So a very big thank you to Healesville Core for enabling this to actually happen. And a thank you also to Tom for the IT support he's provided in the background. That's all from us now, apart from the site visit in 2 weeks' time. Could I just have an indication from those of you here, if anyone is interested in coming along onto the site visit? So Helen, Robin, Rachel, okay, that's good. So I look forward to meeting you in person and seeing you up at Mount Toolabawong. I used to live there many years ago on the Muramura Cooperative, and you'll see where my old home used to be and have a look at the tremendous energy lab that Glenn has up there. There is a comment from Helen, will we need a 4-wheel drive? Absolutely not. There's a bitumen road most of the way, and the last part is on an unmade road, but it's very well compacted and generally very well graded most of the time, and there you don't need a 4-wheel drive. So thank you very much for attending. Gerald, thank you very much again for your presentation, and I'll bid you all farewell and wish you well for the rest of this weekend and your lives. Bye for now.
Thank you.